Let's break down 4 wide receivers, 4 running backs, 2 tight ends, and 2 quarterbacks that you need to try and add last minute on the waiver wire moving into week 3 of 2024 fantasy football. Whether you are looking for a player to have an immediate impact on your roster for week 3 to help you try and secure a victory, or you are looking for a player to stash for the near future to help you bring home a victory, let's break down the last minute waiver wire additions for week 3 of 2024 fantasy football. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 3 pick'ems are live, and if you want to claim a free Patrick Mahomes over half of a total receiving yard, do so by using promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. You can use that free Patrick Mahomes over half of a total yard and combine it with any week 3 pick'em to go ahead and secure 3x your cash. On top of that, all Underdog users this week are going to receive a CeeDee Lamb over half of a total yard pick'em as well. So that's 2 free pick'ems plus a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. All right, let's start at the wide receiver position, and let's start with Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Josh Downs. Recovered from that ankle injury, he is set to make his season debut on Sunday against the Chicago Bears. We go back to 2023. Josh Downs was a very effective wide receiver, had a good rookie season with 771 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 11.3 yards per catch. He had 98 targets, 68 receptions in that rookie season. So, I mean, nothing crazy there, but still solid numbers in his rookie season. He had that nice stretch last year between weeks 5 and week 8 where he had 13 or more fantasy points in every single game. So we definitely know the talent here. I think a lot of people liked Josh Downs coming into the season. Nice slot wide receiver who can definitely have an impact in this Colts wide receiver room, who outside of Alec Pierce has not looked good so far on the season. So he should be able to come in even against a Bears defense that has not been awful to start the season and have an immediate impact, especially because Michael Pittman will still line up as the wide receiver 1 on this team. So Josh Downs sitting at 32% rostered. Whether you need a player to try and plug in at the flex this week, or whether you're just looking to stash a player that's going to be relevant in PPR as the season goes on, Josh Downs is an excellent candidate. I mean, this is a player who got drafted in a lot of drafts and then got dropped because he was not going to play in week 1 due to the ankle injury, and then now has missed week 2 and now is set to play in week 3. So if Josh Downs is out there, really regardless of your circumstance, he's a player you need to try and add on the waiver wire immediately heading into week 3. Let's move along to 49ers wide receiver Jauan Jennings sitting at 36% rostered. And this is more of a short-term play. This is for you guys who are, having injuries pile up on your roster and you need a player to throw into the flex. I will admit I'm not necessarily crazy about Jauan Jennings, but he's got a great matchup against the Rams this week. And now we're not just looking at Deebo Samuel set to miss this game. We're looking at a very real possibility that George Kittle's also not going to play in this game. So we obviously have Brandon Ayuk as the wide receiver 1 and the number 1 pass catcher on this team. But then after that, we got Jauan Jennings. There's really nobody else on this team. And we got Jacob Cowing's been rumored to have some more reps in this game. You got Chris Conley and Ronnie Bell. I mean, it's going to be Jauan Jennings, a player who, is never really fantasy relevant except outside of games where like maybe he scores a touchdown. But this is a player who has good chemistry with Brock Purdy, player who scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl last year. I mean, this is a player who's going to come in and who's going to have to be utilized in this game plan, whether he wants to be or not. If you look at the running back position, Jordan Mason has had just 1 target and 1 reception in each game this year. He's not going to be the guy. It's going to be Jennings behind Brandon Ayuk, and this Rams secondary is awful. They got shredded to pieces last week against the Cardinals. So Jennings, of course, a little bit of risk. I mean, all these guys we're going to talk about today have some sort of risk. They are last-minute waiver additions, but Jennings, I think, has a real possibility to provide a solid fantasy stat line in week 3. Let's move along to Jalen Nailor, who made last week's video as well, wound up with 14.4 fantasy points in week 2 and a touchdown against the Niners. And this week will be against the Houston Texans, another bottom 12 unit against the wide receiver position. And that's not even the most important part of this, last minute waiver wire edition. The most important part is that Jordan Addison has been officially ruled out for week 3 against the Texans. So this means that Nailor is right in line to play as a wide receiver 2 again. And I talked about this last week. Like, even if Nailor is the wide receiver 3 on this team and Addison comes back in week 3 or week 4, I still think Nailor is going to be part of this offense because this Kevin O'Connell offense wants to throw the football first and foremost. And Sam Darnold has looked really solid overall so far through the first 2 weeks of the season at the quarterback position. So they're going to keep slinging it. We know JJ's been a little bit banged up, but he's going to play. We're not going to, JJ's good to go. Unless something extreme happens. So Nailor's the true wide receiver 2 here, but I don't think he's necessarily just a play for week 3. I think he's a guy who could kind of come into his own within this offense and continue to be a viable flex option at the wide receiver position. So Jalen Nailor, just 18% rostered. He's definitely in line to be a last minute ad who can help you out in week 3. All right, last wide receiver I'm going to mention is Andrei Iosivas of the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is a player to keep a close eye on, especially if, injuries are kind of coming down to the wire for you, because I think he has so much more value if T. Higgins doesn't play. And now I will say all the reports are kind of indicating that T. Higgins is expected to play against the Commanders in week 3. But if we get a report that Higgins is not going to play in that game, then Iosivas becomes a must add that I think you can start maybe over some of the players you might have in the flex right now. But even if Higgins does play, I think Iosivas still has some pretty good value in week 3 and potentially in week 4, because the Bengals will play the Commanders this week, then the Panthers next week. And Iosivas had 2 touchdowns in week 2 against the Chiefs. So week 1 was a trap. I was a little bit worried against the Patriots. It was a trap, 5.6 fantasy points. And I get it. Last week, he only had 2 receptions, but they were both touchdowns. Burrow's looking his way in the end zone. And maybe that doesn't change against these weak defenses in the Commanders and the Panthers. So if you're absolutely desperate and T. Higgins does play, I think you can throw Iosivas in and cross your fingers for a touchdown against literally the worst secondary in the entire NFL. But if Higgins does play and you're still desperate, I think once again, you can cross your fingers for a touchdown against the Washington Commanders. So he's just 17% rostered and could certainly help your team in week 3. And moving along to the running back position, let's talk about Cam Akers of the Houston Texans sitting at 23% rostered. This is a player at the moment, by all the reports we have, who is indicated to be the running back 1 for the Texans on Sunday at the Minnesota Vikings. So Dameon Pierce has already been ruled out. He's dealing with that hamstring injury still. And then right now we've got a doubtful report for Joe Mixon, still dealing with that ankle injury he suffered on Sunday Night Football. So that leaves essentially nobody but Cam Akers, who we saw get some action in that same Monday Night Football game with 7 touches, 32 yards on the ground, 4.57 yards per carry, and a reception. He's super, super low in terms of roster percentage right now. This is a player, if you're desperate at running back, and there are a lot of injuries at the running back position, that you can probably go out and add right now. And hey, the ceiling might not be high, but at least he's a starter, and he's on a very good offense in the Houston Texans, who have a chance against any defense to get in the red zone frequently. Now, I know this Vikings defense has looked very good through the first 2 weeks of the season, but once again, this is the Texans. C.J. Stroud, Nico Collins, Diggs, Dell, Schultz, all these guys, they can still get to the end zone and punch a touchdown in on the ground easily. And if they're going to do so, Cam Akers is going to be the guy. So ceiling might not be super high, but you're looking at an RB1 going into Sunday in Cam Akers. And RB1s, regardless of the circumstance, always have a chance to score and to provide you with good fantasy value. So if you need a running back, you need someone to add last minute, Cam Akers is the guy moving into week 3. All right, moving along, we got Foreman of the Cleveland Browns sitting at 18% rostered. And I didn't really envision him making today's video because you look at last week's game, Jerome Ford still looked very good, had 9.14 yards per carry off of 7 touches. And I don't know what happened in the second half. Like I've read, because it was raining, they gave all the touches to Donta Foreman. Like, we still have a small sample size here, and it was kind of weird. But then the day, Donta Foreman had 14 touches in week 2. And was not nearly as efficient, just 3 yards per carry. And both players added a reception, both Ford and Foreman. But the reason why he ends up making the video today is because they're playing the Giants, and this team has been awful against the run so far on the season. They're allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the year. So that puts Donta Foreman, even if Jerome Ford ends up still being the RB1 on this team, in a position where the Browns are up ahead, that he can still come in here and get a lot of touches. And I don't know, maybe we still see, 10 plus touches to Donta Foreman in this game regardless. But on top of that, the Browns in the next 3 weeks, they get the Giants this week, then the Raiders, then the Commanders. They have a very good schedule for the next coming week all around, but also for the running back position. So we could continue to see plenty of touches to Donta Foreman in the next coming week. So Foreman, if you're desperate enough, due to the matchup, I do think you could throw him in, but I think he also sits as a pretty nice stash for now to see what kind of happens with this Browns backfield over the next couple weeks. All right, moving along. Once again, a player I did not envision making today's list. Let's talk about Alexander Mattison of the Las Vegas Raiders, who made last week's video. And I told you guys, like, this is a player, if you're desperate, he's probably going to get touches. You can throw him in. You can cross your fingers. And that kind of proved to be true because he scored a touchdown and vultured it from Zamir White. But the important thing is, while Zamir White is still getting more touches in this backfield and hardly doing anything with them, 3.38 yards per carry in week 1, 2.67 in week 2, Mattison's getting all the goal line work. And the only reason, I know he's a little bit higher rostered at 45% rostered, but the only reason he really makes today's list is because he's playing the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers are arguably the worst run defense in the whole NFL, and one of the worst defenses in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back position in the entire NFL. And if Mattison's getting the goal line work, he's probably going to score against the Panthers this week, but I don't think the ceiling is going to be as low as 6.1 fantasy points like we saw in week 2. And keep in mind, Mattison had that receiving touchdown in week 1 as well. So a little shaky here, but the involvement in this offense has been there. And I guess this offense is nothing to sneeze at because they came from behind last week and beat the Baltimore Ravens. And once again, they're at home. This is their first home game. I know Andy Dalton's playing at the quarterback position, but that doesn't change anything in terms of the defense for this Carolina Panthers team that is just god-awful all around. Good position for the Raiders to be in. They could come in, have a big home victory in week 1. And yes, Zamir White could still be a part of that, but Alexander Mattison, like I said, getting those goal line touches can certainly be a part of it against this awful Panthers run defense. All right, this one is going to be more of a stash, but the last running back I want to talk about is Emanuel Wilson of the Green Bay Packers. Pretty efficient in the touches he got in week 1 against Philly with 11.5 yards per carry, and he added 2 receptions, 4 carries, 46 yards on the ground. But then in week 2, got a couple of touches once again, but had just 5 carries for 9 total yards, 1.8 yards per carry. So a little bit of a mixed sample size here. But the main reason we want to talk about Emanuel Wilson is because obviously Josh Jacobs is the clear-cut RB1. There's no disputing that. 16 touches, 2 receptions week 1, 32 touches in week 2. And they have elevated Chris Brooks to the active roster as well because rookie running back Marshawn Lloyd, who throughout the offseason was much predicted to be the handcuff to Josh Jacobs, has hit the IR as of 3 days ago. But I think, well, some people are still looking at Chris Brooks as the handcuff potentially to Josh Jacobs, or both these guys, Wilson and Brooks. I think it's going to be Emanuel Wilson because we've already seen him get involvement and get touches in this offense. So if you're looking for a stash or you own Josh Jacobs, just hunting for another handcuff in fantasy football, Emanuel Wilson, a very good candidate because this Packers offense looked fine in week 2 with Malik Willis at quarterback, and they're going to get Jordan Love back sooner rather than later is what all reports are indicating. There's even reports indicating that Jordan Love might play in week 3. So this Packers offense, I'm not worried about it whatsoever. You should not be either. And Emanuel Wilson comes in looking like a very strong handcuff moving into week 3. Let's move along to the tight end position, and let's talk about Brenton Strange sitting at 9% rostered. At the time I'm recording this, Evan Engram has not practiced. So at the time I'm recording this is Friday night. He missed practice again on Friday, still dealing with that hamstring injury, has not practiced this week. So it appears as if he is trending towards missing Sunday's game on the road at Buffalo, which means Brenton Strange would be in line for another start. He was the starting tight end in week 2, had 6 targets, 3 receptions, 65 receiving yards, and walked away with 9.5 PPR fantasy points. So Brenton Strange, right now, fantasy football, is the tight end 17, which is nothing great. But like I said, he can get you close to double digits potentially if he scores a touchdown. Probably has a better fantasy day, a pretty good floor indicated by what we saw in week 2. And at the end of the day, he's going to be the starting tight end for the Jaguars. Ceiling might not be crazy unless he scores a touchdown, but right now, the pass catchers on this team kind of trying to figure out who's going to be what. I mean, we see Gabe Davis catching a couple balls. We see Christian Kirk doing nothing. Then we see Brian Thomas Jr. actually making an impact. So we know that Trevor Lawrence loves the tight end position. Brenton Strange, 9.5 fantasy points in week 2. He's certainly a viable starting option. If you are hurting at the tight end position, you have a player like Evan Engram, George Kittle, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson potentially, whoever it may be who's hurt going into week 3, whether they're playing or not. A lot of those guys not playing, whether you're worried because they may suit up, but they're coming off an injury, whatever it is, you're struggling. Brenton Strange, at least a guy you can plug in and cross your fingers heading into week 3. All right, another streaming candidate at the tight end position that I think you can just plug in and cross your fingers is Zach Ertz of the Washington Commanders, sitting at 19% roster. This was a player going into week 2 against the Giants that I told you guys, well, I like Zach Ertz if you need a last-minute tight end, and I like him again in week 3. Not necessarily the best or worst matchup here against the Bengals Monday Night Football, but I think he's just going to continue to be kind of relied on. He's had 4 targets in both games so far this year from Jalen Daniels, had double-digit fantasy points in week 2 against the Giants. Like I said, it's a tougher matchup this week than it is last week against the Giants, going up against the Bengals this week, but he's still going to be part of this game plan. I mean, you really look at the pass catchers on this team, we're not seeing a lot of targets go around from Jalen Daniels, and we're seeing a lot of touches to Brian Robinson, even to Austin Eckler, and Jalen Daniels is running the football, right? But he did throw the football a lot more in week 2. So Zach Ertz, I think, is just a solid add. Maybe the ceiling's not crazy high. Of course, you're going to look for a touchdown, but the floor, once again, similar to Brenton Strange, at least indicated by week 2, looks pretty safe. And I will say, as a last-minute additional add, you could look at Mike Gesicki, who was going to make today's video because he's only 39% rostered, and he's coming off of a 9-target, 7-reception, 91 receiving yard day in week 2 that mounted him 16 fantasy points. But he's dealing with a calf injury, and he has missed Friday's practice and has been missing practice this week. So Mike Gesicki in the same matchup. Got 2 potential options with Zach Ertz and Mike Gesicki in this matchup, but Gesicki might end up missing Monday night. We probably won't know until Monday, so a little bit of risk, but 2 guys you can definitely add last minute as we approach week 3. All right, let's quickly go over 2 quarterbacks, and I want to start with Geno Smith, who's sitting at 37% rostered. Hasn't had a super high ceiling so far on the season, but believe it or not, he's the quarterback 10 right now in fantasy football. 18.8 fantasy points in week 1, 17.8 in week 2. So, yeah, I mean, Geno hasn't been great, but he hasn't certainly been bad either. Had 327 passing yards last week, had a passing touchdown, had a passing and rushing touchdown in week 1, and that was against the Denver Broncos at home, who aren't a good defense, but at least they have some good defensive players like Pat Surtain, and then at New England, who outside of this past Thursday night football game was starting the season looking pretty good defensively. The point being is the Seahawks are at home here in week 3 against a bad Miami Dolphins defense that just got decimated by the Bills last week. So I think Geno Smith at home is in a really good spot. Could be one of these quarterbacks that comes away in week 3 with over 20 fantasy points. But even if he doesn't hit that mark, his floor has been really safe through these first 2 games, but he has the potential to score way more than 17 or 18 fantasy points in week 3. Even in single quarterback leagues, if you're desperate for a quarterback at the moment, like, I don't know, maybe you're left streaming because you own Tua and Jordan Love or something like that, and you weren't able to pick up Derek Carr or Baker Mayfield, and you're just kind of sitting with a questionable guy. I mean, you also have Justin Herbert coming up kind of last minute here with that ankle injury after, getting x-rays at the end of last week's game. So maybe you're a Justin Herbert owner. Maybe you're just not confident in your quarterback one. I think Geno Smith is a really safe play. As we approach week 3, he's certainly a player you can add last minute and plug in for the week. All right, one more quarterback that you can plug in, and you shouldn't have to worry about anything, is Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings, sitting at 36% rostered. And we just talked about Geno Smith being the QB 10 right now in fantasy. Sam Darnold is the QB 11, 15.6 fantasy points in week 1, 20.9 in week 2. He's thrown an interception in each game, and I really wish he hadn't, because he'd be sitting even higher ranked, which would be really interesting to see. But he's thrown 2 touchdowns in each game so far on the season. So there's another home game for the Vikings this week. They get the Houston Texans. This defense is certainly not bad, but it's also certainly not great. And I think this Kevin O'Connell offense is just going to continue to air it out. They look pretty solid on the ground as well, and it should just be another good day for Sam Darnold. These next 3 weeks will be really interesting. At home against the Texans, then on the road against the Packers, and at home against the Jets in week 5 before they hit that week 6 bye week. So the first 2 weeks have been solid for Sam Darnold, but I think we'll certainly get a clear picture of what type of starting quarterback he's going to be over the next 3 weeks. And the opportunity I like the most for Sam Darnold, if you need to start him in fantasy, is here in week 3 against the Houston Texans. Should be a good game script. Both offenses should look good in this matchup. And he's just one of these players, while the ceiling might not be incredibly high, similar to Geno Smith, that you can plug in and you're probably at worst going to walk away with 17, 18 fantasy points around that mark. So if you need a last-minute quarterback for week 3, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, those are the names that are the least rostered that I like the best. That'll do it for today's video. Don't forget, guys, we have everything that you guys need for week 3 fantasy football here on the channel. Start sits at every position. Our early waiver wire video for the week. Must start defenses, must start kickers, buy low trade candidates, running backs and wide receivers that you cannot afford to bench. Make sure you guys check out all the videos for week 3 that are on the channel. And on top of that, we will have a live Q&A tonight, as well as tomorrow morning before Sunday's action kicks off. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss anything. But more importantly, drop any fantasy football questions that you have down below. I will answer every single comment in the comment section down below before Sunday's action kicks off. So if you have any fantasy football questions, please let me know. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.